We're going to be listening to a presentation from David Mahdi. I'm the Chief Identity Officer for Transmit Security, the rise of the machines, why authentication is needed for both humans and machines. So let's give a warm welcome to David.
I don't need the mic. Yeah. All right. Good morning, everyone. Oh yeah, here's the clicker. I think I need that. We don't have machines, actually. I don't have this automated, unfortunately. I'm sorry about that. Good morning. I have the pleasure of speaking on the last day, and especially after the party, so forgive me if my voice is kind of raspy, but no matter what, I try to copy Ron Burgundy, but no vocal exercise will get this horse out of my mouth. But anyway, so I want to talk about machines and why they're important. This has been an excellent conference, but here's one problem with this conference. There's been nothing about machines, for the most part. We've been focused on human authentication and human use cases. Of course, we need to do that, but guess what? We're already outnumbered by machines. So what I'm going to do today is talk about what they are. I'm going to talk about why we need to get a hold of these things now, because when we talk about chatbots and all these things, we'll define what those are. And because I used to be a Gartner analyst, it's burnt in me to give you advice and recommendations at the end, so at least you have some kind of plan. I'm not just going to obsess about the problem. I'm going to actually go into some of the solutions here. All right, so let's dive in. So when we think about the digital world, we're all told it's going to be amazing, right? The metaverse, you get in your car, and you're presented with all these amazing digital experiences, right? But we can't have all these digital experiences without these things, machines, right? And I'm going to define what they are, because yes, they are hardware, but they're also software as well. And already guaranteed, you already have machines outnumbering your human identities in your environment today. And again, I'll get to the definitions of those. So the machines are already here. 70% of them already have access to sensitive data in your organization today. And they already outnumber your humans on average by 50 times. Right? And a lot of organizations that I've worked with in the past, say I'm just talking about digital certificates, because those are also machines. It's like, how many digital certificates do you have? And they're like, oh, we think we have maybe 5,000. We're like, all right, do some discovery. They run a discovery, and then they come back and they're like, actually, we had 50,000. Right? They're on printers, they're on routers, they're on all sorts of different kinds of devices tucked away everywhere. And if one of those is vulnerable, an attacker can get in and use that to effectively leverage that trust or weaponize that trust. Right? We'll talk a little bit about that, but they're already here today. And like I said, right, at this conference, rightly so, we've been focused on things like passkeys and all, FIDO and all the work that's been done. Right? Really good keynote, going through the numbers and looking at all the stuff again with humans. But the IAM market, whether we talk about privilege access management, single sign-on, right, authentication, it has been mostly focused on humans. So get ready for the next ride, because the machine identity space is going to be just as big, if not bigger, than how we think of IAM today. All right, let's go here. This is a bit delayed. So what are they, right? Let's first start with definitions, okay? So they're really things like workloads, containers, applications. That's kind of the software side. The hardware side, they could be operational technology. So say if you're in a hospital setting, could be MRI machines, and so on, or it could be manufacturing equipment that could be on the network, that's operational technology, or IoT. So there's hardware and software. And don't forget mobile devices, laptops, desktops, you name it. But the bigger thing we're going to kind of focus more on today is the software side of it. And some of these things are ephemeral. Even things like chatbots. They're event-driven. You go to a website, a chatbot pops up. Maybe it uses a cookie or some way to identify you, and it says, hey, David, last time you were here, you had a problem with your bill, right? Maybe it's a telco that I work with. And so that bot didn't exist 5 minutes ago, but now it exists. And it has rights and entitlements, or it should have rights and entitlements, because maybe it's going to access some kind of repository where it has my account information. And there was an airline, which I won't name, but many years ago, the airline's chatbot, in a setting like that, revealed the wrong customer's information to the wrong person, and it actually had a lot of PII in it. So these machines need control, they need security, and they need all the things we talk about IAM, right? Right access to the right resources at the right time for the right reason, blah. Anyway, that's another thing that Gartner burnt into me. And so when we talk about credentials, there are things like secrets, keys, digital certificates, symmetric keys, asymmetric keys, could be clear text stuff, and all that. And we're going to talk more about that momentarily. But I do have to say, as a PSA here, that will not work for machines. I had a big government client ask me, David, can I use a smart card for machines? And I was like, how is, I mean, maybe the camera guy that's on the thing, maybe if it's a physical machine and you give it a smart card, okay, fine, the robot could use the smart card. But we can't use these things, these tokens, for machines. It's just not going to work, right? So we have to use different kinds of credentials and treat them differently. But that brings me to this, and I don't know, the colors are a little bit off, so there should be like a light blue arrow going in and out. So what is this? This is the human identity lifecycle. And for myself, I always think of this way, whether I'm talking about authentication or governance or privilege access management, no matter the use case, if I'm talking to some of my friends that are running identity programs, my brain automatically goes to this, and I start to map out what kind of solutions they have in place to deal with this. So when we think about human identity, you have some kind of onboarding, identity proofing, corroboration. That brings them into this circle. And this circle is kind of where you trust them. So you go from a stranger, do an onboarding process, and you bring them on. Whether it's a consumer or employee, doesn't matter. Then the second part is you build their identity, right? You put them in your system, whatever group they're in, their rights, their entitlements, you build out their digital identity. Then from there, you give them credentials, and that's where you kind of get in this third cycle here. Now, I did a lot of briefings for politicians that you mentioned FIDO, and they're like, what? I don't understand. What does that mean? And so I would talk about authentication and authorization. I learned very quickly when you're briefing a politician, I won't name the countries, although I came from Canada, so I may or may not have done stuff there. I changed it to ongoing access. Because when you think about it, I already built trust with the organization. I'm not a stranger anymore. I did KYC. I did all that stuff. They know who I am. I have a digital identity. But on a day-to-day basis, when I log into my bank or my airline or PayPal or whatever it might be, I shouldn't have to prove who I am every time. I authenticate. And what is authentication? It's just my ongoing access, right? That's all it is. So I kind of changed the label on that. And when I did, the politicians got it. And then they started going, hey, maybe we need to invest more in that part of digital identity to enable a digital economy. Anyway, that's another thing. I'm getting off track there. But then we have kind of deprovisioning, exercise the right to be forgotten. And then there's the inevitable account reset, which should trigger some kind of light onboarding. That's the human side. It's not all that different for machines. Again, it depends on the type of machine, what the machine is doing. If it's a chatbot, it could exist. You could close your browser, and then that chatbot should be terminated. Shouldn't have access to that stuff anymore, and it shouldn't exist. But you have some kind of onboarding, and in this case, it's some kind of creation where they come in. Should follow a similar process, but of course, you're not going to do an ID selfie check of a machine. You're going to have a different process for that. So then you have different kinds of provisioning, different protocols, and so on and so forth. So I'll talk about those. Where you're storing those credentials. So again, if you look at NIST 800-63, and you look at all the AAL levels, it's very similar. Very similar when you think about trusted execution environments, TPMs, all of these areas, SIMs, all of this stuff. Again, depending on your use case, you might want to store those credentials in one of these sensitive areas, and it should be based on risk. Maybe not every single machine should be deployed in that manner. You have ongoing access, so once the machine exists, it should have the ability to authenticate, right? So if it is a machine that's going to exist for some time, let's just say it's a supervised machine, and so I created a bot. It's basically like an intelligent script, and that script is running and it's executing things for me, but it's borrowing from my rights and entitlements. But my organization can determine if something goes wrong, if there's some kind of error or it's weaponized in any way, maliciously, that they can tell that it wasn't David, it was a machine that represented David. So that's why we need to introduce authentication when we think about these machines. And then, of course, there's expiration. So they should expire. They shouldn't always exist. You should have some end of life for these machines. Again, it's going to depend on the use case. And there's likely going to be the inevitable rotation and revocation. So I wish I had time to go into crypto agility. It's a big area that I'm very passionate about. But when I think about things like post-quantum, That is an event, a crypto agility event, where if you have all these machines in your environment today, and they're keyed for a certain hashing algorithm, and you do a discovery, and you find maybe we've got 1,000 machines that could potentially get hit by some post-quantum attacks, you have to do rekeying and reissuing and all of that stuff. And I'm going to talk about strategies there, but that's really kind of the whole machine identity kind of life cycle. Now, let's map it to technologies and solutions. Now, a lot of you definitely have machines in your environment today, but you also have some machine solutions already deployed, right? So these are things like you've got maybe some certificate managers, you've got your own CAs, they have some rudimentary management capabilities, discovery capabilities. You've got other stuff in the cloud, AWS, Google. They all have functionality in this area, Microsoft as well. And that maps to things like key management. So you can have key management for data at rest, typically, but some of these systems can also be applied for machines. Secrets management. A lot of privileged access managers are getting into this space as well because they see, hey, we've got these accounts, but we also could have machines that could do automated things where they're dealing with sensitive databases and so on and so forth. And then, of course, you've got, I think you're going to see more of the traditional IAM players talking about non-human identities, workload identity. So this space is already going to start to collide with a lot of the human identity products and services that are there. And last but not least, the root of trust, this bottom here, which is hardware security modules. So those things, depending again on the scenario, you might have HSMs in place, and that's perhaps where your root of trust is and where these machines kind of fall back to. So if we, there's a little bit of delay with this thing here. So if I dive down even further, I kind of think of like the two flows. So when you think about the big umbrella of machine identity management, this new market, now it's on the Gartner hype cycle, and you're going to see more research on it. You've got the software side, so workload identity, and you have the physical hardware side. So I alluded to that earlier on in the presentation. I'm going to be focusing more on the software. This is the stuff that's definitely here and now. The issue I would say with OT and IoT is that FIDO is doing some really good work here, but there's still a lot of fragmentation, right? Anyone who says they're the world leader in IoT security, again, my spidey sense goes off. I'm like, oh, okay, come on. Like for what, one industry, like connected cars? Okay, cool. But you can't say you're the world leader in IoT because there's too much fragmentation. But what we have now today, for sure, right in front of us, we have cloud security issues. Right? We have other software types of issues. We have more attackers looking at weaponizing this stuff against you. ASUS got attacked where the attackers got into ASUS and they leveraged one of their certificates so that they could deploy using ASUS's update mechanism on all the ASUS machines that are out there for drivers and so on. They used that as their malware propagation tool, and it was because they leveraged their certificate. So they were able to effectively sign malicious code, and it just ran because it was trusted. That's what we're talking about here. And there's more attacks that you're going to see as we button up the human identity side and bring in things like passkeys, and we start to lock that down more. Attackers are going to find ways in. They don't care if it's a human or a machine. They will use this against you, and they already are. All right. Let me keep going here. So what are the known and unknown pains? So I've had at least over 1,000 engagements with clients all around the world, and these are some of the typical issues that we already know of today. I guarantee you, as this market develops further, there's a lot of unknowns, and there's other things that I don't even know about that we're going to encounter. As we start to do more in the cloud, as we start to bring in more automation and more bots with RPA, we're going to discover there's more issues here. But some of the things that we found, certainly just dealing with the fragmentation of all these cloud environments, all the different types of software, some of them are using proprietary methods. If you did just looking at certificates, just a scan, some applications have multiple certificates working at the same time that they're using maybe a baked-in self-signed CA to deal with all that. And maybe that you can't see it, and you have to crack into those applications. But if a bad actor knew about a vulnerability, they could use that against you. So that fragmentation is working against you now. We need kind of that single pane of glass, which we don't have. There's managing the secret zero. I won't get into that here, but if you're interested, quick Google search of the secret zero. That's always been a bit of a challenge in building out your root of trust. policy enforcement, and as I mentioned, kind of the fragmentation, the visibility, and the governance. That's the biggest issue. Again, you have a lot of these products and services in your environment today, but you have to log into a million consoles to get an idea. Even if you're talking about PKI, you might have multiple CAs, and you might have to log into different CAs to see what they've deployed and what those expirations look like. So it's really a mess, and it is definitely going to be a barrier to having these machines work for us and certainly to secure them. All right, let's keep going. So when we think about machine identity management, it's very similar to human identity management as in terms of the concept, okay? So it's not just technology, it's people, process, and technology, okay? So there should be people in your organization that understand this stuff, and they understand, what the use cases are, what the risks are, so on and so forth. And I'll talk about what that looks like team-wise, skill set-wise, and everything else. But on the technology side, the goal here is, number one, get visibility and control. So one of the key recommendations is do discovery. Find out what you already have in your environment, because you already have machines there today. Find out what risks they are. So the benefits of having a program like this, just start with a program, is to at least start to measure it, because you're not going to manage what you're not measuring. So start measuring it. Start to think about federation here, federating these machines, bringing them together again. Now we start to get in a little bit of tooling. Lean on some of your vendors as well, right? So some of the vendors here, when they start talking about human identity, it's like, thank you. Now I need workload identity management, because those have rights and entitlements, and those have all those things, right? So, and then the last thing, I wish I had more time to go into, but it's crypto agility. So of the machines that are using crypto as their root of trust, right, even on the human side, we have to get ready for PQC, post-quantum. And so what this is going to mean is we've kind of been lazy for a few decades. We can sit on the same algorithms and not really have to worry. Some people had issues with SHA-1, moving from SHA-1 to SHA-2. That was a little bit of a crypto agility incident, but it wasn't too bad for most people. When we get into PQC, it's going to be bad. We talk about Y2K. Y2K was nothing. PQC is going to be a big deal, and it's going to be a big deal for some of you out there today. And so you have to start with machine identity management today to at least get an idea of what you're working with, so that if you have to say, well, this entire part of our network, we either have to segment out completely, or we need to start migrating it over. And some of you, I know, are going to have to deal with that. There's no question. All right. So let's talk about people and process and what that looks like in an organization. So I showed you some of the solutions and tools that might be there and doing discovery, but I want to talk about people and process because sometimes we obsess over the technology too much, and we all know that we're people. We haven't been automated yet, right? I'm not a machine talking to you, I'm still a human being, and presumably you have to deal with people as well. So when we think about the environment that you're in, it could be the IAM team that could make up your machine identity management group. DevOps, developers are building software. They need code signing. That's also a flavor of machine identity, all that kind of stuff, right? So developers are inevitably, they have their fingerprints on this too. Your apps teams, your cloud teams, your security teams, and other business units, right? So as they get into the wonderful world of digital transformation and building all their own apps, they will be touching machine identity management. So you can have a centralized team or a decentralized team. And what that could look like would be like this. Centralized, but embrace decentralization. Okay? So think about things like orchestration, pulling it all in together. Allow the business units and the developers to do what they need to do. You don't want to get in their way. But at the same time, you want to keep an eye on them from a centralized perspective, saying like you're using 2 different CAs to sign your products, maybe because that's what's required for the platforms you're delivering to. But they're not going to know about hashing algorithms. Shouldn't expect them to. They're not going to know if one of the critical algorithms they're working on now has a vulnerability that you need to take care of. And these can happen at any moment in time, right? I should say that if you go back and look at the Estonia national ID, there was an issue with the chipset where an attacker could go to get the public key of any Estonian citizen, upload it to a cloud crack service for $4,000 US. They could extract the private key in 2 weeks, right? So should a developer know about this stuff? No. You want them to write code, build those apps, But you and your machine identity team, you should be aware of that and those risks. And so by having some centralized control, you can keep an eye on what they're doing from a development perspective and say, you need to rotate those, or we'll rotate those for you on your behalf. So that's what it looks like here as well. All right. Let's keep, this is really delayed here. So I'm going to kind of land this plane here on this quick presentation today. I'm going to leave you with some recommendations, as I mentioned. So the first thing you want to do is start with discovery. Always start with discovery, and it's not a one-and-done type thing. You want to do some kind of discovery. Could be, there's tools that use Nmap. You know, there's a variety of different tools out there, some free tools, some proprietary ones. But the idea is that you do the discovery, and it's a periodic process, because these machines will grow, they'll shrink, they'll grow, they'll shrink. So you want to get an idea of how many are in your environment. So the top bullet there, you know, I kind of alluded to it, but when you think about the machine identity lifecycle, it depends on the use case. So expect a really high volume. There could be ones that have high velocity, so you could get 1 million customers going to your website, and you could have to create 1 million bots all at once. And then maybe half of those get terminated because they close their browser or they move on. Right? So the variety and the volume of these machines is going to be different. So you can't treat them all the same. The credentials will be different. The risk profiles will be different. And some of the technologies that will be needed to discover and manage them will be different. So we have to understand that. So again, that's why you need to bring it back to the principles of having this kind of multifaceted team that works on centralized principles but embraces decentralization. So determine their usage today, and really today what my recommendation would be is look at what tools you have in place that map to machine identities. I would say Gartner's done some good research about machine identities, so you could leverage some of that, but you're going to see other research firms start to put out more stuff on machine identities, like the Cyber Hut and so on and so forth, on what are the tools and recommendations on the next bullet, which is what's the advice in building the team, right? Should it be some of the people who are doing human identity management, or do we need to get other folks to do it as well? And then last but not least, I mentioned this so many times already, determine the risk, right? Because some of these machines, who cares? They're not dealing with risky stuff. You may not have to worry about them. That's fine. But there's other machines where there's one client I work with where they were using bots to update drones, okay? And these drones had potentially life-threatening objects on them, and they were using that to update firmware. Because they're like, there's like, I don't know, 300 computers on one of these drones, and all of them are using certificates and other kinds of keys. I'm like, well, yeah, that is super sensitive, so you want to make sure that you really have a good hand-holding process for that type of use case. But again, you might have other situations which fall in the middle, so I would recommend looking at the risks, and the risks are going to start to change here when it comes to machines. All right. The last recommendation is, it is a new area, okay? There's no leader in machine identity management. Anyone says that to you, they're lying. That doesn't exist. There are more and more providers that are getting into machine identities. You'll see different monikers, workload identity, maybe even flavors of container security, cloud posture security management, blah, 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 blah. No one's a leader yet, but start to get your team ready, because this is going to be massive. There's going to be multiple tools you're going to have to manage for a while. I personally don't see that changing anytime soon. That's why you need to look at orchestration and these types of things to start bringing things in to at least give you some kind of centralized control. And the last kind of recommendations, FIDO's doing some good work here. There's Spiffy, there's other protocols that are starting to be worked. There's a working group now that's been started. My brain is not working from staying up too late, but I can talk to you after about it. There's a good working group that's starting to set these standards. So if you're interested in the space, now is the time to get your opinions injected, because it's early on. And please bring the situations that you have in your environment. Understand what's going on, and you could bring that to the table to influence some of these standards here today. Because maybe I'm the only one, but this is going to be a massive space for us. And if we think that dealing with human identity was problematic, this is going to be, it's far more exciting, but it's going to be far crazier. And that's really it. So thank you everyone for coming. I'll stay back for some questions. I'll also head over to the Transmit Security booth, and I'll hang there if you've got questions on this. But thank you very much.
Thank you, David.